The wind at Angel's Rest Station never stopped moving. It whistled low through the dry grass, kicked up dust from the gravel path, and sent old papers tumbling like forgotten prayers. The sky hung flat and colorless, stretched too thin over a land that no longer promised much. Just one bench, one rail, one water tower leaning like it didn't care anymore. And on that bench, a little girl sat barefoot, knees pulled tight to her chest, a pair of women's boots tied together and slung over one shoulder. She didn't cry. She had cried already, in the cramped train washroom, beside a still hand growing colder by the mile. But tears were for softer places, for people with rooms and warm stoves. Not for the wide, cracked plains where even the sun looked tired of trying. No one had asked her name. The conductor helped her off the train with a stiff hand and said, "Wait here, someone'll come." Then he boarded again. She hadn't asked where the someone might be coming from, or how they'd know she was the one who waited. Her dress was too short now, frayed above the knees. One pocket had a hole, through which poked the ear of a cloth rabbit that had no face. She turned it in her hands over and over like a worry stone. An hour passed. Maybe two. A cart rumbled by and didn't stop. Men came and went, glancing her way the way folks glance at stray dogs, half pity, half fear of being bitten. She watched them without blinking. Dust gathered in the folds of her dress and the corners of her eyes. She blinked once, then stared down the tracks as if she could will the past to turn back and bring her mother upright again. A dog sniffed at her heels and wandered off. Still she sat. When the sheriff came by, he squinted at her as if she were a puzzle no one had asked him to solve. "Where's your folks, girl?" she said quietly. "My mama died today." He rubbed his neck. "Well, you can't stay here." She just looked at him. He shifted his boots, cleared his throat, and muttered something about the preacher's wife maybe knowing what to do. "I'll check in after supper," he said. "See if anyone's claimed you." He didn't ask her name either. Afternoon burned into evening. The wind cooled but didn't stop. A horse approached, slow and heavy, hooves soft on dry dirt. Its rider swung down not far from her, a tall man in a faded coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, carrying a small crate of nails under one arm. She watched him the way stray dogs watch people, ready to bolt but hoping. The man didn't look at her right away. He tied his horse, checked his saddle strap, lifted the crate into the wagon hitched nearby. Then finally he glanced toward the bench. She stared straight at him. Something about that stare made him pause. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrapped sandwich still mostly intact. Without a word, he crossed the short distance and held it out. She didn't move. "It's turkey," he said. His voice was rough, low, like gravel under boot, but not unkind. She took it with both hands. He returned to his wagon without waiting for thanks. She unwrapped it slowly, carefully, like it might vanish if she hurried. The first bite was too big. She chewed and chewed, eyes never leaving the man. He loaded another small parcel, adjusted the rope, climbed onto the wagon bench. His hands were large and weathered, but moved with care. He looked toward her again, not sure why. Then she said it. "Can I spend a day with you?" No tremble in her voice. No pleading. Just a plain question, dropped like a stone into still water. The man didn't speak for a long time. He looked at the sky, then at her. Finally he nodded once. She stood without hesitation and walked toward him, cloth rabbit dangling from one hand, boots thumping against her back. He didn't offer a hand up. She climbed the wheel herself and settled beside him. "What's your name?" he asked as the wagon creaked forward. "Hetty May." He nodded again. "Ransom Holt." They didn't speak again for miles. The land rolled wide and dry around them. Sparse cottonwoods leaned away from the sun. The wind pulled threads from her hair and made them dance. She let it. He kept his eyes on the road. But every so often he looked sideways to make sure she was still there. At his ranch, the gate dragged along the dirt as he opened it. The place wasn't much. Just a barn, a chicken coop, and a house made of sun-bleached wood that looked like it had been built with more hope than lumber. A clothesline snapped gently in the wind, though it was empty. The porch steps creaked. He helped her down this time. The dog came running, an old mutt with a limp and one ear that bent wrong. Hetty knelt and touched its head. It wagged once and lay down beside her like she'd always lived there. Inside the house was clean but plain. A single chair by the fireplace. A kettle on a hook. A table with two chairs, though one was stacked with old books. She didn't seem surprised by the sparseness. He poured her a tin cup of milk. Set it before her. She looked at it for a long time. He sat across from her and didn't speak. "Where's your wife?" she asked. He blinked once. "Didn't work out." She nodded like that made sense. She sipped the milk. That night, Ransom laid a spare blanket on the couch, then hesitated. "There's a bed upstairs if you'd rather." "I'll stay with the dog," she said. He nodded. Lit a lantern. Set it by her feet. Then climbed the stairs and closed the door, though not all the way. She curled up on the rug beside the dog, Boots tucked under her head like a pillow. He didn't sleep. He sat in the upstairs room looking out the window. The land was so empty it made a man's thoughts echo. In the distance, a coyote howled. He closed his eyes, remembered the sound of a woman crying in a bed that never held children. Remembered how quiet the house had been since. How easy it was to forget what small sounds could mean. Footsteps, breath, the clink of a cup. He listened now. Downstairs, a child was breathing. In the morning, he found her in the barn feeding the chickens. "You know how to do that?" he asked. She shrugged. "I watched. Don't need to work. You're just visiting. I like feeding things." That afternoon, he rode into town to get sugar and flour. She sat beside him again, quiet, watching the wind. At the general store, folks noticed. "That yours, Ransom?" asked the shopkeeper's wife, a pinched woman named Mrs. Patch. "Just for the day," he said. "She looks thin. She's been traveling." He paid and left. The woman watched him go, mouth pursed. Back on the wagon, Hetty said nothing. But her hand was resting on his sleeve. That night, he fixed cornbread. She burned her fingers trying to help. He bandaged them in silence. She didn't wince. They ate together at the table. The second chair had been cleared. After supper, she drew a picture of his horse with a charcoal stub and pinned it to the wall with a tack. "You draw?" he asked. "Sometimes." He looked at it. It wasn't good. But it was alive somehow, lines pressed with the kind of care you don't learn in school. Later, she curled up on the rug again. This time, he put a second blanket over her. She said nothing but shifted closer to the dog, like she'd been waiting for that gesture. He sat in the chair until the fire died low. In the stillness, he said aloud, "I'll take you back tomorrow. They'll know what to do." She didn't answer. But he swore the dog looked up at him like it disagreed. The next morning, he was loading the wagon when the sheriff came riding up. "Morning, Holt," Wexler said, tying his horse to the fence. "Mornin', Dot. That the girl from the station?" Ransom nodded. "You keeping her?" Ransom said nothing. "Well," the sheriff went on, "Preacher's wife is checking with the Burks. They might take her. Lot of folks asking questions already." "Didn't think kindness needed permission," Ransom said. "Kindness don't. But this town runs on its own kind of oil, and folks don't like when it burns funny." He tipped his hat and rode off. Ransom watched the horizon a long while after. Inside, Hetty was packing her rabbit and boots into the burlap sack. He leaned in the doorway. "You ready?" She looked up. "Am I going away?" He didn't answer. Her lip trembled for the first time. Then she said, "I can be real quiet if that helps." He stepped forward, then stopped himself. "I'm not sending you anywhere bad. Just someplace with other kids. Maybe someone younger." She looked down. "I ain't small enough," she whispered. His chest hurt in a way he hadn't felt in years. Outside, the wagon creaked under the weight of waiting. Inside, a little girl stood too still, boots in hand, rabbit limp against her skirt. And somewhere in his mind, a woman's voice asked softly, "What if we're not broken, Ransom? What if we're just meant to hold things others let go?" He reached for his coat and turned away, not trusting his face. Then a small voice behind him said, "Can I spend one more night?" The wind howled through the porch slats. He closed his eyes, then nodded. "What?" Like a man who'd already lost too much to turn away from someone asking to stay. The morning broke brittle and gold, with wind tracing low across the grass like fingers searching for something lost. At the Holt Ranch, nothing moved at first, not the porch swing, not the shutters, not even the chickens. Just quiet, wide as the plains. Quiet so deep it felt like the house hadn't been breathed in for years. Ransom stirred his coffee and watched the girl from the window. She was already outside, sitting on a feed bucket, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the chicken coop like it might tell her what to do next. Her boots, still tied together, hung from the porch railing. She hadn't put them on since she arrived. She didn't seem to know if they were meant for walking away or staying. The dog rested its chin on her foot. She didn't move. Ransom took another slow sip, eyes still on her. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe for her to speak first. Maybe for the ghost of his wife to tell him what to do. Instead, the wind answered, lifting the corner of a saddle blanket, flapping the barn door once. The kind of restless wind that made a man remember every promise he failed to keep. He stepped out with a mug still in hand. She didn't look up. "You hungry?" A beat passed. Then, quiet as morning dew, I could be. He nodded, turned back toward the kitchen. By the time he had the skillet hissing, she was sitting on the step, swinging her legs gently. She watched his every move through the open door, watchful, not needy, like she expected things to be taken away. He slid 2 eggs onto a tin plate, thick slice of sourdough beside them. She took it with both hands like it might slip. You don't got to clean the plate, he said after a while. She paused, yolk on her chin. Not if it's clean already? He almost smiled. When she finished, she stacked her plate on his. Can I help with something? He hesitated. Then, you ever water a horse? She blinked once, solemn. No. But I think I could do it. She followed him to the trough, her bare feet silent in the dirt. He watched her try to lift the pail. Too heavy? She didn't ask for help. Just dragged it half full, splashing most of it on herself, then reached for another. He watched a moment longer, then turned to the saddle post. He'd never seen someone so small take up so much space just by trying. Later he showed her how to brush the mare. She likes behind the ears, he said. I like behind the ears too, Hetty said matter of fact. He looked at her, not sure whether to laugh or weep. Inside, he gave her a rag and pointed to the dusty windows. She don't need to do that, came a voice at the door. Mrs. Patch stood there, parasol closed, face pinched like a lemon dried too long in the sun. Ransom sighed. Morning. She stepped inside without asking. I came to see if you were serious. About keeping her. She's not a stray dog, Leona. You didn't answer the question. You didn't? Just poured a second cup and left it on the table for himself. Hetty hovered near the far wall, cloth rabbit held against her chest like a shield. Leona looked her up and down. You're thin, girl? Hetty nodded once. Any kin? No, ma'am. Leona clicked her tongue, turning back to Ransom. The preacher's wife still thinks the Burkes might take her. They've got space. Burkes want pretty orphans, Ransom said evenly. The kind they can parade on Sundays. She'd be taken care of. I'm taking care of her. Leona squinted. Ransom, you're a single man. And folk remember things. You really think it's wise after what happened before? Something in his face changed. Quietly. Like a man pulling shut a door you weren't meant to see behind. I think I got more space in my house than half the people preaching from pews. Leona sniffed. She'll break your heart too. Then she left. The door clicked like a gavel. Hetty didn't ask what she meant. But Ransom looked down and saw her holding the rabbit tighter than before. That afternoon, he saddled the mare and handed her the reins. Walk her around the pen. Just slow. She looked up at him like he'd given her something holy. She walked in lopsided circles for 10 minutes. Every few steps, she glanced toward him to see if he was watching. He was. That evening, she carried firewood to the hearth without being asked. He cooked stew. She peeled the carrots, handed them over without speaking. After supper, she curled up again on the rug. But this time she laid her boots beside his by the door. He noticed. Before he doused the lamp, she said into the dark, Did you ever try? Try what? To have kids. He paused. Yeah. Did they come out? No. Was it the mama's fault? He looked toward the window. They said it was mine. Oh. A long silence. Then, soft as a secret, my mama said I was loud and stubborn. But worth it. He swallowed hard. You're quiet now, she added. Guess I am. You still worth it? He couldn't answer. The fire cracked, slow and tired. He left it burning longer than usual. Next morning she was already outside again feeding the chickens. One pecked her hand and she yelped, but laughed too. He stood on the porch with his coffee watching her. The dog nudged his leg. Yeah, he said. I see her too. He hitched the wagon before noon. Need to resupply, he said. Can I come? He hesitated, then nodded. She put on her boots without complaint. They were too big, flopping on each step, but she wore them like armor. The ride into town was quiet, but not empty. She asked what the different clouds meant. He told her which ones carried storms, which ones just passed. Storms always come, she said. Sometimes they leave things behind. At the general store, people noticed again. Mrs. Patch stood outside with the preacher's wife. The Burkes happened to walk by, arms full of fresh fabrics. She'd look nice in blue, Elsie Burke said, fake sweet. She looks nice now, Ransom said and walked past. Inside, Hetty ran her fingers across a row of marbles in a jar. He bought her one. She chose a red one with a swirl like fire inside. You ever play? He asked. She shook her head. Never had no one to lose to. Outside, someone whispered, That's the cursed rancher's stray. Ransom's spine stiffened. Hetty just kept walking. At the wagon she said, "They don't know you." He stared at her. "They think they do," she added. "But they don't." He helped her up without a word. Back at the ranch, she set her marble on the windowsill, right where the sun hit it. "It's mine," she said. "But I want to see it shine." That night, she fell asleep with the dog again, Rabbit in her arms. Ransom stayed downstairs longer than usual. The fire snapped. The clock ticked. The boots were still beside his. In the quiet, he whispered, "You're worth it too." He didn't realize she'd heard until she said, barely awake, "I know." The next morning, the sheriff returned. He stayed on his horse. "She's got 2 days," he said. "Burke'll sign. You don't have to make this harder." Ransom didn't answer. "She ain't yours, Ransom." Ransom looked at the house. Then at the small boot prints in the dirt. He didn't look back at the sheriff. He just said, "She didn't ask to be." Inside the house, a girl crouched behind the curtain. She'd heard every word. And her marble fell from the windowsill and rolled across the floor like a truth no one could stop. The rumors came faster than rain after a dry spell. By mid-morning, the general store was thick with it. Women pressing flour into brown paper bags, hands moving automatically while their mouths churned fresher stories than the bread they'd come for. Words like inappropriate, unnatural, and not right floated around like flies in summer heat, buzzing just loud enough for ears meant to hear. Ransom Holt's name hung in the air like the smell of wood smoke that wouldn't lift. They said he'd gone soft. That loneliness had warped his sense. That taking in a little girl without kin or papers or promise of adoption was an invitation to trouble. Not because of what he'd done, but because of what he might. Men who'd lost things were unpredictable, they said. Especially men like Ransom, good with his hands, bad with his luck. When he rode into town to pick up a horseshoe order, the gossip peeled back like curtains behind windows. Eyes darted toward Hetty sitting beside him, small hands clutched in her lap, her red marble in one, cloth rabbit in the other. He didn't say a word. But she felt it, every look, every whisper, every space they were not welcome in. After they left, Mrs. Patch set down her yardstick and said to no one in particular, "You ruin your name for one girl and you'll never get it back." Hetty asked about it on the way home, voice low. "What's it mean to ruin your name?" Ransom didn't answer right away. Just shifted the reins and stared at the road ahead like the answer might be waiting in the dust. "Means folks stop saying it kindly." She was quiet a while. Then, "They already don't say mine kindly." The cart hit a rut. Neither of them flinched. At the ranch he tried to brush it off. Gave her a tin bucket and pointed to the blackberry bushes along the edge of the fence line. "Pick what's ripe, not green. You'll taste the difference." She worked till her fingers were stained purple. He watched her from the barn, pretending to tack new horseshoes. But his eyes never left her. Not when the wind tugged her dress, not when the dog curled beside her like a second shadow. Inside that evening, she set the berries on the table with quiet pride. He ruffled her hair. She leaned into it without asking. After supper, she asked to draw again. He gave her the last sheet of butcher paper he had, and she took her time. Her lines were slow, intentional, just like everything she did. He didn't look until she handed it to him. It was a sketch of his porch. His boots. Hers. Side by side. He looked at it for a long time. Then said, "I'll find a nail for that." She smiled without showing her teeth. She didn't do that often. Later, after she'd gone to bed, he stayed up fixing a drawer that had stuck since winter. Not because it needed fixing, but because the silence in the house felt too loud now. When he finally turned in, he found a note on his pillow. Just one sentence in blocky letters. "I like your quiet." He folded it in half and didn't sleep. The next day he rode into town alone. She stayed with the dog, feeding it scraps and reading from an old mail-order catalog she couldn't understand. Just naming things she'd never touched. "Velvet," she whispered, tracing the page. "Petticoat. Comb with pearls." In town, Ransom walked straight to the preacher's house. Asked for 10 minutes. Got 5. "She doesn't belong with the Burkes," he said. "Ransom," the preacher said gently, "no one's saying you're not a good man. But people have long memories. You think you're helping her, but you're putting a target on both your backs. She needs somewhere to land. I'm not a danger. No one says you are. They don't have to." The preacher sighed. "It's not about what's true. It's about what folks choose to believe. And right now they're choosing the wrong story." Ransom nodded once. The kind of nod men gave before turning toward a fire they couldn't put out. He left without asking permission. That night, he hammered a nail into the wall and hung the drawing. When Hetty saw it, her mouth opened slightly, then shut again. She walked up to it, touched the edge, then leaned her forehead to his arm for just a breath. "You're not gonna let them take me, right?" He didn't answer, but she stayed close to him all evening. At bedtime she asked, "Did you ever get picked? Like by anyone?" He hesitated. "No. Not even when you were little?" "No one wanted the quiet boy," he said. "I want him," she said. Then curled up with her rabbit and fell asleep like that. By morning he knew what he had to do. He cleared the back room. It had been storage, old tack, a broken rocking chair, crates of books from a school his wife once dreamed of building. He opened the window. The light reached in like it hadn't in years. Swept the floor. Fixed the latch. Mended the ripped curtain. Put the drawing above the headboard of the small bed frame he assembled from what he had. It didn't look like much, but it looked like hers. She saw it after lunch and just stood there. "This for me?" "It's a room," he said. "I never had one." He scratched the back of his neck. "Well, it's small." She didn't move. Then she stepped forward and touched the quilt. "You folded it real good." He nodded. And when she threw her arms around his middle, he froze, but only for a second. Then he bent down and hugged her back. Not tight, but enough. In town that same day, someone nailed a notice to the church door. Town council to review custodial concerns regarding orphan minor, 4 days hence. Mrs. Patch passed it with a satisfied hum. The preacher removed his hat and rubbed his eyes. The sheriff spit into the dirt and muttered, "Should have stayed quiet, Holt." When the letter reached Ransom's hands, Hetty was tracing her marble along the porch railing. He read it, folded it, didn't say a word, but she could feel the storm in his silence. That night, she watched him sharpen his knife at the kitchen table, not because he needed to, but because his hands needed something to hold. She said, "If I'm not good, they'll take me, won't they?" He didn't meet her eyes. "You don't have to say it," she whispered. "I know how this works. People leave." He looked up sharply. "You didn't do nothing wrong. They always say that first." He stood, slowly like a man wading through mud, then crouched before her. "You're not going anywhere unless you want to." She blinked hard, then nodded. "What?" Like it hurt. Later he found her sleeping on the floor again, right outside her new room. Not inside it. As if afraid it might disappear if she truly claimed it. He carried her in, tucked the quilt under her chin. Then he stepped back and just stood there. He didn't cry, but something inside him cracked. Quietly. Like a frozen fence post finally giving under spring thaw. By sunrise he'd made a decision. He hitched the wagon and told her they were going somewhere. Where? Somewhere to show him who you are. She didn't ask again. Just climbed up beside him. They rode into town slow, dust curling behind them like the tail of a snake. He stopped in front of the schoolhouse. Classes weren't in yet. Just the teacher, Miss Carlyle, sweeping the steps. He said, "Can we come in?" She looked confused but nodded. Inside, Hetty sat at a desk for the first time. She picked up a pencil like it might bite her. He asked Miss Carlyle for a piece of paper. She gave him one, eyes narrowing. He passed it to Hetty. "Write your name." She looked scared. "You can do it," he said. She wrote, Hetty M. Then stopped. "May," he said gently. She finished it. He nodded. Then turned to Miss Carlyle. "She's not a stray. She's a person." Miss Carlyle swallowed. "I see that," she said softly. Outside someone had seen them. The sheriff, Mrs. Patch, 2 other townsfolk. By nightfall the gossip had changed. But so had something else. When they got home, Hetty hung her paper beside her drawing. Then she looked up at him and said, "Do I have a last name yet?" He paused. Then said, "Not yet." She nodded like she understood. But her eyes said she hoped. That night he sat outside alone, hands clenched tight. He hadn't meant for this to go this far. Hadn't meant for his heart to feel this much again. Hadn't meant for the town to sharpen their knives. But the girl had placed her marble in his boot that morning. And that, somehow, meant everything. The next morning he found her making cornbread with too much salt and not enough flour. "It's bad," she said, defeated. He tasted it. Then said, "We'll try again." She looked up. "We." He nodded. She smiled. But outside, a wagon was already coming down the road. And in it, the Burkes. Coming early. Coming ready. She saw them through the window. And quietly whispered to herself, "I can be yours. I don't have to be hers." He heard her. And stood so fast the chair fell backward. The Burkes stepped down from their wagon dressed like they were heading to church. Elsie in a sky blue bonnet that hadn't seen wind in months, and Grady in a coat too stiff for labor. Their boots crunched on the gravel, each step precise, rehearsed. Behind them the sheriff waited on horseback, arms crossed, jaw tight. Ransom stood in the doorway, Hetty behind him, clutching the frame. Her fingers were white at the knuckles, and the red marble rested in her palm like a wish no one would grant. Grady smiled like a man trying to win a bet. "Morning, Holt. We thought we'd save the preacher the trouble." Ransom didn't step aside. Elsie peeked over his shoulder. "There she is. My, what a delicate thing. You must be exhausted, sweet girl. Come now, no need to be afraid." Hetty said nothing. Her chin tucked low. "She's not going with you," Ransom said, voice level. The sheriff cleared his throat. "You don't have guardianship. That council notice is valid, and the Burkes were approved yesterday." Elsie nodded quickly. "We've already prepared her a room. A real room. Curtains and all." "She has a room," Ransom replied. "And a name. She's not for display." Elsie's smile thinned. "We're offering her stability. This ain't about pride." Grady added, "You're a good man, Ransom. But even a good man knows when to let go." Ransom looked down at Hetty. She was still holding the marble, but her eyes were fixed on the floor, not the people, not him. As if she already knew the ending. As if she'd lived it before. He stepped back, not away from her, but toward her. Placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You want to go with them?" he asked. She shook her head once. "Say it out loud," he said gently. Her voice trembled. "I want to stay." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was sharp and hanging, full of waiting judgments. Elsie adjusted her gloves. "She doesn't understand what's best for her." "I do," Ransom said. "And she does." The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "If this goes to vote, Holt, it'll get messy. Maybe ugly." "I've stood in ugly," Ransom said. "This ain't it." Elsie tried again. "She could be part of a real family." "She is," he interrupted. "She just chose it." Hetty looked up at him then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise, not yet. But a knowing. The Burkes left without further protest, though Elsie's parting glance said she'd be back, with paperwork and people who spoke in law, not love. Later that afternoon, Ransom walked Hetty up the hill behind the barn, where the prairie met the sky and the earth quieted into soft breath. The wind moved gentle up there as if afraid to disturb the past. A small wooden cross leaned crooked in the soil. "My wife's here," he said. Her name was Mabel. Hetty's hand found his. "She wanted kids. Always did. Tried 3 times. What happened? They didn't stay." Hetty sat beside the grave, small boots tucked under her skirt. "Maybe they were waiting for me." He almost laughed but didn't. His throat was too tight. "She used to sit here and watch storms roll in," he said. Said it reminded her that life keeps moving no matter what hurts. They sat together for a while. Hetty placed her marble at the base of the cross. "For her," she said. "So she knows I'm not taking her place." "You're not," Ransom said. "You're making a new one." That night, someone left a sack of folded dresses on the porch, small ones gently used. No note. Just kindness, quiet and unannounced. Hetty tried them on one by one. She chose a faded yellow one with a patch at the hem. "It looks like morning," she said. The next day, she braided her hair with a piece of blue ribbon she found in the drawer. Ransom hadn't seen it before. She met him at the table, boots laced, smile soft but sure. "Can we build something?" "Like what?" "A shelf. For the drawings." He nodded. "After chores." In town, gossip softened. Some spoke of scandal, others of stubbornness. But a few, those who'd lost something too, began to understand. The preacher's wife sent over a book of bedtime prayers. The general store owner gave Hetty a tin of peppermint candy. Even the sheriff, when he passed on the road, tipped his hat. At supper, Hetty placed her spoon down and looked across the table. "If I had a middle name, what would it be?" He thought for a long time. Then said, "Hope." "Why?" "Because you didn't ask for it. But you brought it anyway." She smiled and wrote it in the margin of her drawing with a blunt pencil. "Hetty may hope." He didn't correct her. That night, as wind picked up and shutters tapped like old bones, she didn't sleep on the floor. She slept in her bed, under her quilt, with her marble on the sill. And when the thunder cracked and lightning split the dark, she didn't cry. But Ransom stood in the hall anyway, just in case. She whispered from under the quilt, "You can come in if you want." He sat at the foot of the bed. "You ever scared of storms?" she asked. "Used to be," he said. "Before I realized they pass." She reached out, found his hand. Held it till sleep pulled her under. He stayed longer than he needed to. Outside the storm rolled on. But inside the house didn't feel empty anymore. And by morning there was a letter nailed to the fence. A final hearing date. 4 days. One last chance. Hetty found it before he did. And said nothing. She just folded it and placed it beside her marble. The day of the hearing arrived dressed in gray. The sky held no color, just a flat blanket of waiting. Even the wind had gone still, as if the land itself held its breath. Ransom stood by the window, boots laced, coat brushed, jaw locked in place. Behind him, the kettle hissed, and Hetty sat at the table, hands folded around a cup she hadn't sipped from. Her ribbon was tied crooked that morning. He didn't fix it. They didn't speak much as they rode into town. The wagon's wheels creaked louder than usual, every turn of the axle sounding like a question that had no clean answer. Hetty's hand clutched the pocket of her dress where the marble sat, tucked safe inside with the folded letter. The town square had gathered. Not in celebration, not quite in judgment either. Something in between. Faces peered from behind curtains. A few children whispered. Most grown-ups didn't. The council waited inside the old chapel. 3 elders seated behind the pulpit, paper stacks beside them, ink pots full. The Burke sat near the front, back straight, smiles taut. Elsie wore lace at her collar. Grady's coat was pressed within an inch of its life. Ransom and Hetty walked down the aisle together, step for step. He didn't place a hand on her shoulder. She didn't reach for his. But the space between them was charged, tethered by every quiet act they'd shared since that first day at the station. The preacher stood. We're here to determine what's best for the child known as Hetty May. All parties may speak. Grady went first. Talked of stability, discipline, reputation. He used the word appropriate 6 times. Elsie added that she'd already sewn a quilt. Then came the murmurs from behind. The town seamstress, the grocer's wife, even Miss Carlyle the schoolteacher. One by one they stood. Spoke not with drama but with steadiness. Words like safe, seen, happy entered the room like lanterns in fog. Then the preacher nodded toward Ransom. He rose. She's not just the child I took in. She's a girl who showed up in the world with nothing but grief in her eyes and still gave kindness to my dog, my land, my quiet. He paused, letting the silence hold his next words. She didn't ask to stay. She asked to spend a day. And in that day she became the one thing this place never gave me, belonging. He looked down at Hetty, who looked right back, chin lifted. I don't care what name's on the form. She's already family. The preacher looked toward the girl. Do you want to speak, Hetty? She stood. Her boots made no sound. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the folded letter, the one from the fence, and held it up. I read this every night. The preacher tilted his head. It says I have to leave. Her voice trembled, then steadied. But nobody asked what I want. She turned to the Burkes. I know you have a nice house, but I'm not a hole to be filled. I'm not a picture to fix your wall. Her eyes found Ransom again. He lets me talk without rushing. He makes the fire warm before I wake up. He hung my drawing with a nail, not just a smile. The preacher's brow furrowed. Do you know what adoption means? She nodded. It means I stay. He leaned back, looked at the council. Papers shuffled. Pen scratched. Then silence. A heavy breath before it broke. Hetty May Holt, the preacher said, eyes soft. You can stay. Elsie let out a gasp. Grady stood too fast. But no one moved to stop them as they left. Ransom kneeled beside Hetty. She didn't smile, not yet. Just pressed her head against his shoulder like she needed to feel the earth still held her weight. The townsfolk began to file out, murmuring in that curious way people do after something true has been said out loud. Outside, the wind returned, lifting dust and light in the same breath. Ransom helped her onto the wagon seat. She leaned against him. Halfway home she said, You didn't cry. He smirked. Didn't want to embarrass you. She looked up. Can I change my name? To what? Hetty May Holt, she whispered. Just that. Just that. Just that. When they reached the ranch, she jumped down without waiting. The dog barked once and ran to her. She ran too, toward the porch, toward the room that waited, toward the shelf they'd still build. He stood at the gate a moment longer, watching her. And for the first time in years, the house looked full before he even stepped inside.